The night my mother chose to delete me from her life, she used a single sheet of paper as her weapon. We were gathered for a dazzling family dinner at our home in the Chicago suburbs. The table was a vision of perfection, and the air was filled with laughter. I was under the impression we were celebrating my sister Sophia's engagement. I couldn't have been more wrong. My mother, Eleanor Evans, brought the celebration to a halt by slamming her fist on the table. The crystal glasses shivered. The laughter died. "At least one of my daughters isn't throwing her life away," she announced, her voice slicing through the sudden silence. Her gaze was fixed on me, but her praise was for my sister. Then, with a dramatic flourish, she slid the deed to our $750,000 family home across the mahogany table to Sophia. The room erupted. My relatives cheered and clapped as my sister was gifted my inheritance, the backdrop of my childhood, my home. I remained frozen in my seat, a tightness seizing my chest, completely and utterly stunned. I didn't utter a single word. I simply stood, retrieved my keys from the hook near the entryway, and stepped out into the frigid night air. I climbed into my car, and I didn't dare to look back. That was the last time I would see any of them for 3 long years. Before we get into all of that, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Growing up in Lake Forest, Illinois, was like existing inside a glossy brochure. Every lawn was flawlessly manicured, every car a recent model. Our family, the Evanses, blended in seamlessly. From the outside, we were the embodiment of suburban success. Inside, the foundation was cracking. My mother, Eleanor, and her sister, my Aunt Helen Pierce, were the reigning monarchs of this polished world. For them, success and status weren't just valued, they were a religion. Their existence was a carefully curated performance of appearances. They'd trade hushed critiques at the golf club, dissecting who was caught in last year's designer collection or whose husband was having a less than stellar financial quarter. In our family, there were 2 daughters, Sophia and me. Sophia, my older sister, was born to be the star. She was president of the student council, a champion debater, and a member of the Young Leaders Club. She had internships lined up at her friends' father's investment firms before she even had a driver's license. She was meticulously assembled, piece by piece, to become a success story my mother could flaunt. And then there was me, Clara. I was the quiet one. The bright, social glare of my mother's parties held no appeal for me. I was drawn to the gentle hum and glow of a computer screen. When I was 12, my father, Robert, brought home a clunky beige desktop computer. He set it up in the small den we used as a home office. While Sophia was off at tennis lessons, I was in that room, taking the machine apart and meticulously putting it back together. I devoured manuals from the public library, teaching myself the languages that made the machine tick. My mother detested it. "Clara, you're going to strain your eyes," she'd call from the doorway, but her concern wasn't for my vision. It was because my passion wasn't presentable. She couldn't boast to her friends, "Oh, Clara is holed up in a dark room typing indecipherable text." It wasn't the Lake Forest way, but my father, he was different. He'd been a software developer before he switched to finance to appease my mother. He was quiet, like me. He understood what I was doing. He would come into the den and just sit with me, sometimes for an hour, simply watching me code. "What's this one, kiddo?" he'd ask, gesturing to the screen. I'd explain, "It's a small script. It sorts all my music files automatically. I just type a command and it organizes them by artist or genre." He'd lean back in his chair and smile, a genuine smile, not the tight, practiced one my mother wore. "That's brilliant," he'd say, his voice full of warmth. You're an architect. You're building the future, Clara. Don't ever let anyone convince you it's not important. He was my anchor. He was the only one who truly saw me. When I was 15, I entered a statewide coding challenge. I developed a simple application to help local charities manage their donor databases. I won first prize. I returned home clutching a blue ribbon and a small, gold-colored plastic trophy. I found my mother in the kitchen with Aunt Helen, sharing a bottle of Chardonnay. "Mom, look," I said, holding up my prize. My mother gave it a fleeting glance. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she said, before turning back to my aunt. Anyway, as I was saying, Sophia's interview for the Northwestern Preparatory Program is next week. Aunt Helen eyed my trophy with a sour expression. "What's that for?" she asked. "Computers," I mumbled, feeling a flush of heat rise in my cheeks. "I won the state coding competition." She sniffed, taking a sip of her wine. "Well, let's hope it's just a phase. Men don't find girls who are overly technical very appealing." I placed the trophy on the kitchen counter. Later that evening, I discovered it tucked away in the hall closet, behind a collection of old raincoats. I took it to my room and hid it in a desk drawer. My programming awards always seemed to end up in drawers, collecting dust, while Sophia's debate trophies were showcased in a lit glass cabinet in the living room. My father found me in my room later that night. He was holding the trophy. Without a word, he went to the garage, returned with a hammer and a nail, and firmly hammered it into the wall above my desk. "There," he said, "a place of honor for the architect." He was my sole champion, the only person in that house who spoke my language. And then, when I was 17, he died. It was completely unexpected. A massive heart attack at his desk at work. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. The funeral was a masterclass in performance art. My mother was the perfect grieving widow. Sophia was the perfect strong daughter. I just felt hollow. It was as if the structural beams of our house had been ripped out, leaving nothing to support the roof. After the funeral, when the last of the relatives had departed and the sympathy casseroles stopped arriving, an oppressive quiet descended upon the house. In that silence, my mother, Eleanor, transformed. Her grief didn't soften her, it calcified her. It was as if my father's death had sent a shockwave of terror through her, causing her to cling desperately to the one thing she understood, Sophia's success. She funneled everything into Sophia, all the money, all the focus, all the hope. It was a frantic effort to prove to the world, to Lake Forest, that she was still a winner, even as a widow. My father was gone. In his absence, there was just me, the trophies on my wall, and a mother who looked at me as if I were a persistent problem she had no idea how to solve. My only advocate had disappeared, and I was left utterly alone with them. After my father's death, the silence in our house became a palpable entity. My mother's grief morphed into a sharp, frantic energy, and she directed all of it toward Sophia. Sophia was her mission. I was the collateral damage. The college application period laid this division bare. Sophia set her sights on Kellogg at Northwestern. It was her ambition, but it was my mother's obsession. My mother shelled out $25,000 for a private admissions consultant. They spent months polishing Sophia's essays, sculpting her narrative into one of inevitable success. When the thick acceptance packet arrived, my mother wept with joy. She threw an extravagant party and gifted Sophia a brand new pearl-white convertible, complete with a giant red bow. "This is it," my mother toasted with a champagne flute at the party. "This is the beginning." To Sophia. I applied to the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It boasted a phenomenal computer science program, one of the best in the country. More importantly, I had earned a significant scholarship. It wasn't a full ride, but it covered my tuition. I found my mother in her bedroom, meticulously writing thank you notes for Sophia's graduation presents. "Mom, I got into UIUC," I said. "I received the Chancellor's scholarship." She didn't look up from her stationery. "Oh, that's wonderful, Clara. Very practical. There was no party for me, no champagne, no, I'm proud of you." Just that one word, practical. To her, practical was a synonym for cheap, for unimpressive. Sophia went off to Northwestern with a limitless credit card from my mother. Her dorm room was decorated like a spread from an interior design magazine. My mother covered her sorority fees, her shopping sprees in downtown Chicago, her weekend getaways. I went to UIUC. My scholarship handled tuition, but I was on my own for books, fees, and living expenses. I found a room in a dilapidated apartment off campus with 3 other students, and I got a job. I worked the late-night shift from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at a 24-hour coffee shop, serving caffeine to truckers and inebriated students. My days were for classes, data structures, algorithms, systems architecture, and my nights were for pouring coffee. I'd get home at 4 a.m., smelling of stale coffee grounds and burnt sugar, my feet throbbing. I'd catch 4 hours of sleep, wake up, and drag myself to a 9 a.m. lab. Then, in the sliver of time after class and before my shift, I would code. I never told my mother I was working. She never bothered to ask. She sent me $75 a week, an amount she likely considered magnanimous. It barely covered my groceries. One night, I was on the phone with her, sitting in my cramped apartment kitchen under a flickering fluorescent light the landlord refused to fix. I was bone-tired. "You sound exhausted, Clara," she noted, her own voice effervescent. "Sophia is just flourishing. She's been invited to a networking cruise on Lake Michigan." "That's great, Mom," I said, rubbing my temples. "Listen, things are a little tight. My programming textbooks were almost $500 this semester." A beat of silence. "Clara," she said, her tone instantly glacial, "I am already financing your sister's real education. I give you that weekly allowance. You need to learn how to manage your finances. Your father's money is not infinite. It must be allocated to things that matter, to investments. Sophia is an investment." I didn't respond. "Why don't you get a little job?" she suggested, as if the thought had just struck her. "I have a job, Mom," I said flatly. "Oh?" She sounded genuinely surprised. "Doing what?" "I work at a coffee shop." The silence on the line was thick with judgment. I could almost hear her recoiling. "A coffee shop?" she finally whispered, as if I had confessed to a heinous crime. "You're a barista?" "I serve coffee, Mom. It pays my bills." "Oh, Clara," she sighed, a sound of deep, theatrical disappointment. "What will people think? An Evans daughter, serving coffee. Please do not mention this to your Aunt Helen." I hung up the phone. My passion project was the only thing that preserved my sanity. I coded under the flickering kitchen light, building small applications for my professors and creating a campus carpool organization system. I found solace in the logic, the clean, unyielding certainty of it all. If the code was written correctly, it functioned. It wasn't like people. It wasn't capricious or emotional. It was fair. I graduated with high honors and landed a position at a small tech startup in Chicago. It was a decent job, but it was still a startup. The hours were grueling, and the pay was a far cry from a Kellogg graduate's salary. Sophia graduated from Northwestern and walked into a high 6-figure job at a prestigious investment firm. My mother and Aunt Helen were ecstatic. "That's how it's done," Aunt Helen declared at a family dinner, raising her glass to Sophia. Then she turned her attention to me. "And how is your little computer shop doing, Clara?" "I'm a software developer, Aunt Helen." "Right," she said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Computer things. Well, it's good to have a hobby, I suppose. But hobbies don't pay the bills. Not the real bills, anyway. You should be more like your sister. Sophia understands how the world really works. She understands money. My mother nodded in solemn agreement. Sophia has a career. You have a job. I just sat there, eating my food, watching them laud my sister for making money while I was building the very tools that made their world function. I learned to ignore them and keep coding. I ignored them when the power in my own small apartment would flicker because I was scrimping and saving, funneling every spare dollar into my own servers, into my own projects. I was building my own future. They just were incapable of seeing it. I was 29. It had been 12 years since my father's death. 12 years of being the other daughter, the practical one, the hobbyist, the disappointment. I had survived. I had my job at the startup, but my real work began at night. I was developing my own project, a new concept for optimizing urban energy grids. It was a complex endeavor, consuming all my spare time and money, but I knew in my gut that it was a breakthrough. Then came the text from my mother. Dinner, Saturday, 7 p.m. Be here. We're celebrating Sophia. It was Sophia's engagement dinner. She was marrying Mark, another finance guy. He was the exact mold of a man my mother had always envisioned for her. He looked impeccable in a suit and spoke endlessly about his investment portfolio. I nearly declined. I was exhausted, having just squashed a major bug in my code. But a small, foolish part of me felt the pull. It's family, I told myself. I drove to my childhood home, the one my father had bought, the one I grew up in. I walked inside, and the house was aglow. My mother had brought in caterers. Aunt Helen was there, along with a crowd of my parents' old friends, the Lake Forest elite. Sophia was a vision in a red designer gown, one hand resting on Mark's chest, strategically showcasing an enormous diamond ring. "Oh, Clara," she said upon seeing me, offering a kiss that didn't quite land. "You made it. Did you find that dress at... Where is it you shop again?" "It's just a dress, Sophia," I replied. "It's simple." "It's you," she said with a tight smile and turned away. We sat for dinner. The table was exquisite. The chatter was predictable. Money, European vacations, the failures of others. I sat there picking at my catered salmon, feeling like an apparition. Then, my mother stood, tapping her champagne glass with a knife. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, her face beaming with her public smile. "We are all here to celebrate Sophia and Mark, to toast this wonderful union." Everyone applauded as the couple kissed. "Sophia has always been such a radiant light," my mother went on, her voice thick with rehearsed emotion. "She has made me so incredibly proud. She has a brilliant career, and now she's found this wonderful man. She has built a life my father would have been proud of." My stomach churned. My father. "And Mark," my mother said, turning to him, "welcome to the family. We want you both to start your new life on the right foot, with a proper foundation." She reached down beside her chair and produced a thick, leather-bound portfolio. For some reason, my heart began to hammer against my ribs. "This house," my mother announced, her voice resonating through the now silent room. "This house that Robert and I built together. It's too much for me now. It needs a real family living in it." She looked directly at Sophia. "This house belongs to Sophia and Mark," she declared with a proud flourish. She slid the portfolio across the polished table. The deed. My fork stopped midair. The room broke into applause. Aunt Helen was dabbing at her eyes. Eleanor, how generous. I couldn't seem to draw a breath. I looked at my mother. I looked at the portfolio. I looked at Sophia, who was gasping with a look of perfectly feigned surprise. I set my fork down. My hands were trembling. "Mom," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but the room fell quiet. "Mom, what are you doing?" My mother's smile tightened. "I'm giving your sister her inheritance, Clara. This is a celebration. Don't spoil it." "The house," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "You're giving Sophia the house? Dad's house? Our house?" "It is my house to give, Clara," she replied, her voice turning to ice. "But what about me?" The words tumbled out, sounding weak and pathetic. I hated them. My mother let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel sound. "What about you? What have you ever accomplished, Clara? Sophia is successful. She has a career, a future. She and Mark will build on this. You? You're still playing with your computers in some tiny apartment." She addressed the table. "Clara has a little hobby. She makes apps." Aunt Helen chimed in. "Eleanor, you're right. A house is for a real family, for people who achieve things." The room was staring at me, all of them, people who had known me my entire life. They stared with a mixture of pity and cold judgment. They all agreed with her. And then my mother delivered the words that finally shattered me. She looked straight at me, her own daughter, and spat, "You have done nothing with your life." Nothing. All those nights at the coffee shop, all the exams I aced while reeking of burnt coffee, all the hours I spent teaching myself, building something from nothing, trying to create something my father would be proud of. All of it was nothing. I stood up. The legs of my chair scraped harshly against the wooden floor, a violent sound in the crushing silence. My eyes were stinging, but I refused to cry, not in front of them. I looked at my mother. I looked at Sophia, who was already clutching the deed to her chest. "You will regret this," I whispered. My mother just arched an eyebrow. "I highly doubt that." "Sit down, Clara. You're making a scene." I didn't say another word. I picked up my purse, took my keys from my pocket, and walked out of the dining room. I walked down the hall, past the framed photos of Sophia at her graduation, past the empty space on the wall where my father's portrait used to hang. I opened the front door and walked out. I heard the applause resume before the door even clicked shut behind me. They were clapping. I had just been disowned, erased, and they were clapping. I got into my car and just sat there for a full minute, motionless, watching them through the large bay window. They were laughing, raising their glasses in a toast. I started the car and drove away. My childhood had been auctioned off to a round of applause. I had no destination. I just drove, for an hour, maybe two. The tears I had choked back at the dinner table now streamed down my face, hot and furious. My mother's smug expression as she slid the deed to Sophia was burned into my mind. I kept hearing the sound of that applause. "You have done nothing with your life. Nothing, nothing, nothing." The words echoed in the small space of my car. My fuel light blinked on. I pulled off the highway into a deserted rest stop and just sat in the dark. I was 29 years old and effectively homeless. My own mother had given my home to my sister. I checked my bank account. I had savings, but every dollar was allocated for my project, for the servers I needed, for the business license. I had one other family member. I started the car and drove to Lake Bluff, to Aunt Helen's house. It was a large, dark Tudor, just as immaculate and soulless as my mother's. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I walked up the flagstone path and rang the bell. I felt a wave of nausea. I was a beggar. After a long moment, the porch light flickered on, and the door opened a few inches. Aunt Helen peered out, her hair in a silk turban, her face slathered in night cream. "Clara," she hissed, "what on earth are you doing here? Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Aunt Helen," I said, my voice trembling, "I'm so sorry. But Mom," she kicked me out. "She gave Sophia the house. I have nowhere to go. I just need a place to stay for the night." Aunt Helen stared at me, her eyes devoid of any warmth or pity. There was only irritation. She crossed her arms. "Clara, you are a grown woman of 29. Your mother is right. You should have sorted your life out by now." I was dumbfounded. She gave away my house, my inheritance. "It was Eleanor's house to give," she snapped. "Sophia is a good investment. You are not. This melodrama is unbecoming. You need to grow up and stop blaming your mother for your own shortcomings." She began to close the door. "Please," I whispered. "I'm your niece, and I'm telling you to leave my property," she said. "Go sort out your own mess." The door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place. I stood on her perfect flagstone porch, the cold seeping up through the soles of my shoes. That sound, the click of the lock, was the true finality. My mother had pushed me out, and my aunt had locked the door behind me. I was utterly, completely, irrevocably alone. I returned to my car and slept in the back seat at the rest stop. It was a cold, humiliating night, but as the sun began to rise, something inside me shifted. The tears stopped, the shaking subsided. The humiliation coalesced into a hard, cold knot in my gut. It was fury, but a quiet, focused fury. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was free. I had no one left to please, no one left to disappoint. There was no family to go home to for the holidays, no mother to call for approval, no Lake Forest reputation to maintain. I was nothing to them, and that meant I could be anything I wanted for myself. The next day, I drove back to my small apartment, the one I could barely afford. I packed everything, my clothes, my computer, my servers. I broke my lease, a move that cost me nearly all of my emergency funds. I didn't go back to my job. I drove south into the heart of Chicago. I found an apartment in an old building in Wicker Park. It was a tiny single-room studio and a walk-up. My kitchen, bed, and office were all crammed into a 10 by 10-foot space. The window offered a stunning view of a brick wall. The radiator clanged and hissed all night long. It was perfect. It was mine. I spent my last few $100s on a business license and the fastest internet connection I could get. I sat on the floor, my laptop balanced on my knees, and I got to work. I didn't sleep for 3 days, surviving on instant noodles and cheap coffee. The rejection, the anger, the humiliation, I channeled all of it into my code. My project was no longer just a project. It was my answer. I was building a software platform to optimize renewable energy usage for entire cities. It used artificial intelligence to analyze power grids, weather forecasts, and energy consumption patterns. And then it would intelligently redirect power where it was most needed, slashing waste by a staggering amount. It was the idea my father and I had once talked about. He said someone should build it. I stared at the brick wall and I typed. From that night of heartbreak, from the cold of my car, from the definitive click of my aunt's deadbolt, Nexus Grid Solutions was born. My family had cast me aside, but my dream had finally found a home. For 6 months, my single-room apartment was my sanctuary and my prison. I coded relentlessly. Sleep was a luxury, sunlight a distant memory. I subsisted on coffee, instant noodles, and the cold, hard fury that had taken root in my stomach. The Nexus Grid platform evolved. It grew complex, intelligent, and elegant. I had poured every ounce of my pain into the logic, and the code had transformed it into something clean, powerful, and efficient. But my money was running out. The last of my savings from the startup job was gone, vaporized by server costs, licensing fees, and the bulk purchased coffee that fueled me. I was 2 weeks away from a critical choice: pay for my internet connection or buy food. I was 2 weeks from having to crawl back to a coffee shop defeated. I had one final, desperate option: the Chicago Tech Summit. It was a massive, high-profile conference. A basic booth, just a 6-foot table and a sign, cost $2,500. It was the last $2,500 I had. I paid it. I made a pact with myself. If this failed, if no one recognized the value of what I had built, then I was done. I would have to accept that my mother had been right all along. I was a failure. I walked into that convention hall and was immediately overwhelmed. It was a high-tech circus. Giant glittering displays from Microsoft, from Oracle, from a dozen venture-backed startups commanded the floor. They had flashing LED screens, free-branded merchandise, and charismatic representatives in matching polo shirts. And then there was my booth, Booth 313C, tucked in a remote corner by the restrooms. It was just me, a wobbly folding table, a printed sign that read Nexus Grid Solutions, and my laptop. I felt laughably small, like a child who had wandered into a boardroom. I was the hobbyist my mother always claimed I was. For hours, a river of people flowed past, their eyes drawn to the bright lights and big names. I just stood there, my hands shoved in my pockets, trying to project an air of belonging. Around 3 p.m., a woman stopped. She wasn't a corporate type. She wore sensible shoes and had a sharp, focused expression. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring intently at my laptop screen where I had the Nexus Grid interface running a simulation. She pointed. "That's not just load balancing," she stated, her voice crisp. "You're not just reallocating power, you're predicting consumption. You're cross-referencing weather patterns with, is that real-time traffic data?" I was so taken aback I could only nod. Yes, it learns. It anticipates a heat wave and pre-cools commercial buildings during off-peak hours when the grid is cheapest. It knows a sports stadium will empty at 10 p.m. and reduces power to the surrounding transit lines before it happens. The woman finally looked at me. "I'm Dr. Lena Petrova," she said. "I'm a sustainability analyst at the University of Chicago. I've been theorizing a dynamic model like this for a decade. Every engineer I've spoken to said it was too complex, that the AI wasn't advanced enough." "It's here," I said, my voice wavering slightly. She watched the simulation for 10 solid minutes without speaking. I just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. At last, she turned to me. "Who funded this?" My face grew hot. "No one. It's just me. I built it in my apartment." Dr. Petrova looked at me, really looked at me, with a kind of profound respect I hadn't received since my father died. "My God," she whispered. She pulled a business card from her pocket. "You're coming with me. There's someone you need to meet." She didn't just invite me somewhere. She grabbed my arm and practically dragged me away from my sad little booth. She marched me across the convention floor, past the Microsoft spectacle, and into a private VIP lounge I hadn't even known existed. Inside, men in expensive suits were sipping scotch. Dr. Petrova walked right up to one of them. "David," she said, "stop talking about your golf handicap. I found it." The man, David Chen, turned, looking mildly annoyed. "Lena, good to see you." "Found what?" "The thing we've been discussing for years," she said. "The Holy Grail, the smart grid that actually works." She pushed me forward. "This is Clara Evans. She built it in her apartment." David Chen, a prominent venture capitalist, gave me a polite but dismissive once-over. "Nice to meet you," he said, clearly ready to move on. "Show him," Dr. Petrova commanded. I opened my laptop, my hands slick with nervous sweat. I ran the simulation. I explained the code. I spoke for 5 minutes, detailing how it could save cities millions, how it could make green energy not just sustainable, but profitable. When I finished, David was silent. He looked at Dr. Petrova. "Is this for real?" "It's more than real, David," she said. "It's a paradigm shift." David looked back at me. "How much to get you out of your apartment?" I don't know," I stammered. "I'll give you 100,000, he said, "for 10% of your company. That's seed funding. It'll get you a proper office and a partner, $100,000. It was an astronomical sum. "Okay," I whispered. "Yes, okay." He smiled. "Good. My office Monday." "Lena, thank you. You just made me a very wealthy man. That $100,000 changed the trajectory of my life. I didn't rent an office, not right away. I stayed in my tiny Wicker Park studio. But I did one crucial thing. I hired someone. I posted an ad for a programmer. I interviewed a dozen candidates, most of them men who patronizingly tried to explain my own code back to me. Then Priya Sharma walked in. She was sharp, quick-witted, and had a tattoo of a binary sequence on her forearm. She sat at my small kitchen table, looked at my code for 30 seconds, and said, "Your recursive function is inefficient. You could refactor this and cut processing time by at least 20%. I hired her on the spot. For the next 6 months, Priya and I practically lived in that studio. We were a 2-woman army. We worked through the nights, fueled by delivery pizza and cheap ramen. We argued about syntax, hunted down bugs, and rebuilt the entire platform from the ground up, making it stronger, faster, and more secure. We were a small, exhausted, but intensely focused team. With David's connections, we landed a meeting for a pilot program. A regional grocery chain, Midwest Grocers, was being crippled by its energy costs. With 150 stores, each filled with massive refrigerators and freezers, their bills were astronomical. They agreed to let us test our system on a single store. I found myself in their corporate headquarters, a sterile beige room with a long conference table occupied by men in suits. They looked at Priya and me like we were a high school science fair project. "So what's this really going to save me, sweetheart?" the CEO asked, leaning back in his chair. I slid a document across the table. "Our projections show a 19% reduction in your energy costs for the pilot store," I said. He chuckled. 19%? That's ambitious. We'll see. We ran the pilot for 1 month. I barely slept, monitoring the data 24/7. I watched my algorithm learn the store's unique rhythm, managing the freezer cycles, dimming the lights in empty aisles, and shifting the energy load to off-peak hours. At the end of the month, I was back in that same beige boardroom. I placed a new piece of paper on the table. The CEO looked at it. The color drained from his face. "This is a mistake," he said. "This number can't be right." "It's not," I said, my voice steady. "It's not 19%. I was wrong. Nexus Grid cut your energy costs by 32%. And that's just for one store. We ran the numbers. If you roll this out to all 150 stores, we will save you over $5 million in the first year." There was a stunned silence. The CEO just stared at me. "I want it," he said finally. "In every store now." We signed the contract. We were no longer a hobby. We were a real company. A week later, a small tech publication ran a story, "The Little App That Could: How a 2-Woman Startup is Slashing Millions in Energy Waste." The article called our tiny company revolutionary. I cut out the article. I didn't send it to my mother or my aunt. I just folded it, placed it in my wallet, and got back to work. The first year was a battle for survival. The second year was a period of explosive growth. The Midwest Grocers contract was our launching pad. Suddenly, we weren't just two women in a cramped studio. We were the company that had saved a major grocery chain millions of dollars. Dr. Petrova published an academic paper on our algorithm. David Chen put our name in front of every major investor he knew. My tiny apartment was inundated with calls. School districts, commercial real estate firms, city governments, everyone wanted to know how to cut their energy bills. We moved out of my studio and into a real office, a spacious loft in the West Loop with exposed brick walls and huge windows overlooking the city. I used our first-year profits to hire 5 more engineers. Priya became my chief technology officer. I was the CEO. I learned to be a boss, to scrutinize contracts, to stand in a boardroom full of men and not feel the need to apologize for my existence. I learned the power of the word no. By the end of our second year, Nexus Grid Solutions was immensely profitable. Our software was managing the energy grids for over 400 school districts across the Midwest, 3 major office complexes, and a dozen manufacturing facilities. Investors began flying in from Silicon Valley. They took me to Michelin star restaurants, talking about scaling, unicorn valuations, and 9-figure buyouts. They offered me millions for pieces of my company. I remembered David's $100,000 seed investment. That was a partnership. These new offers felt different. They felt like my mother. They wanted to package me, to groom Nexus Grid, to make it look impressive for a quick sale. I said no to all of them. We didn't need their capital. We were funding our expansion with our own profits. We were building something real, something that worked. We were building the future my father had dreamed of, and I had money. For the first time in my life, I had real, substantial personal wealth. I wasn't the girl working late shifts at a coffee shop. I wasn't the girl with a hobby. I could have stayed in Chicago, but I was tired of the city, the constant noise. I wanted quiet. I wanted to go home, not to Lake Forest, not to my mother's house, but back to that world. I wanted to return to the place that had rejected me, but entirely on my own terms. I found a piece of land in Winnetka, the town right next to Lake Forest. It was just as exclusive, just as affluent. It was a statement. I didn't buy one of the sprawling cookie-cutter mansions that my mother and aunt so admired. I found a plot on a bluff overlooking Lake Michigan, and I hired an architect. I want to build a living house, I told her. I want it made of glass, recycled steel, and sustainable timber. And I want it to run entirely on Nexus Grid. For a year, I oversaw the construction of that house. I designed it with the same principles I used for my code. Clean, efficient, beautiful. It had solar panels that looked like a sleek black roof, a geothermal heating system, and smart glass that tinted automatically with the sun's intensity. And in the basement, it had a server room where the Nexus Grid mainframe managed every single watt of power. My house didn't just consume energy, it produced it. On sunny days, my meter spun backward as I sold power back to the same grid my mother and sister used. My house was a quiet, functional, and profitable declaration of independence. When I finally moved in, I stood in the living room. The entire back wall was a sheet of glass, looking out at the vast expanse of water. It was profoundly peaceful. There were no trophies in a glass case, no staged photos of a perfect family. It was just me. I was 31 years old. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar technology company. I was living in a custom-built, self-sustaining home in one of the wealthiest towns in America. And my family had absolutely no idea. In the 3 years since I'd walked out, I had never once checked on them. I never looked up my mother's name, never Googled Sophia or her husband, Mark. It was as if a door in my mind had been sealed shut. They didn't exist for me anymore. my mother, my sister, my aunt. They were all just a few miles down the road, living in their bubble of status and appearances, completely unaware that the hobbyist they had cast out was now their neighbor. I sat on my new sofa, looked out at the water, and felt a quiet equilibrium I had never known. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was balance. The scales had finally, silently, been set right. It was a Tuesday, almost 3 years to the day since that dinner. I was in my home office, a room with 2 walls of glass overlooking the lake. It was my favorite place on earth. I was on a video conference with our new expansion team, finalizing a massive contract with the city of San Diego to integrate Nexus Grid into their new Smart City initiative. It was a billion-dollar public-private partnership. We were going national. I was focused, content. My work was good. Then, the chime at my front gate echoed through the house. I glanced at the security feed on my second monitor. A dark green Jaguar, an older model, was parked at the base of my long private driveway. I didn't recognize it. "Hold on, team," I said into my headset. "I have someone at the gate." I watched the screen as a woman emerged from the driver's side. She looked up the long driveway toward my house and her hand flew to her mouth. It was Sophia. My blood ran cold, my chest tightened. She looked different. Her expensive business suit was wrinkled. Her hair, always flawlessly styled, looked thin and lifeless. She was with a man, Mark, her husband. They looked like they had been in the middle of an argument. Then, Sophia pulled out her phone, her eyes fixed on the sleek brushed steel logo by my gate, Nexus Grid Solutions. C. Evans, founder. "Guys," I said to my team. My voice suddenly strained. I have to drop. It's an emergency. I'll call you back." I disconnected the call before they could reply, my eyes glued to the security feed. Sophia was on the phone, shouting. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her face, red and contorted with shock and fury. She was pointing at my house. She was talking to my mother. I knew with a sudden, sickening certainty what was coming next. I had about an hour. That's how long the drive from Lake Forest would take. I walked out of my office and into the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I sat on my sofa and stared out at the water, trying to force myself to breathe. What could she possibly want? Money, an apology, to tell me my glass house was just an elaborate hobby? The hour crawled by. The gate chime rang again. This time, it was my mother's silver Mercedes. It glided up the driveway. Eleanor Evans stepped out of the car. I watched her on the camera. She looked diminished. The powerful, intimidating woman who had erased me was gone. This woman looked older, frailer. Her perfect blonde hair seemed brittle, and her expensive clothes hung loosely on her frame. She walked up my stone pathway, her hands trembling. She stopped at the front door and raised a hand to knock, but then hesitated, trying to fix her hair, to compose her features into a familiar mask. She was preparing for a performance. I didn't give her the chance to knock. I walked to the front door, took a single deep breath and opened it. She flinched, caught off guard. The smile she had prepared froze on her face, a terrible, forced, quivering thing. "Clara," she said, her voice an octave too high. "Sweetheart." The words sounded like poison. I just looked at her. I didn't say hello. I didn't tell her to get off my property. I just waited. Her eyes darted past me, into my home, taking in the soaring ceilings, the clean, modern lines, the valuable art I had carefully selected. She saw the success. She saw the money. I was just, she stammered. "Sophia?" "Sophia called me. She saw the gate. She saw your name." She looked back at me, her eyes wide and desperate, the manufactured smile gone. "Sweetheart," she said again, her voice cracking. I had no idea. I didn't realize how well you'd done. I just stared at her. She didn't realize. She didn't realize because she never looked. She didn't realize because she never asked. She didn't realize because she never cared. She hadn't come here to apologize. She had come here because my name was on a large, expensive gate. She had come here because Sophia was in trouble. She had come here for herself. All the nights working the late shift, all the hours I toiled until my eyes burned, the terror I felt at the tech summit, the public humiliation at her dinner table, the definitive click of my aunt's deadbolt, it all settled inside me. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded. There was nothing left but a cold, sad, empty space. I looked at this woman, my mother, who was now a stranger. "You never cared how well I'd do," I said. My voice was quiet, not an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. It was the truest thing I had ever said. Her face crumpled, the mask shattered completely. She saw her performance wasn't working. "Clara, please," she whispered. "Sophia, she's having a terrible time. Mark's fund, things are very bad. We? There was no we. She had destroyed we 3 years ago with a piece of paper and a round of applause. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door. I just looked at her, at the woman who had thrown me away like garbage, and I gently closed the door in her face. I heard the lock click into place. It was the same sound I had heard at my aunt's house all those years ago, but this time I was on the inside. I went back to my sofa. I sat down. My tea was cold. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun move across the surface of the lake. The shaking had finally stopped. I felt nothing. And in that moment, I knew that I was finally, truly free. The day after my mother appeared at my door, the calls began. My phone, normally reserved for business, lit up with a Lake Bluff area code. I didn't recognize the number and let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message notification popped up. "Clara? Clara, dear, it's your Aunt Helen." Her voice was high-pitched and anxious, a tone I had never heard from her before. It wasn't cold or sharp. It was cloyingly sweet. I just spoke with your mother. It seems there has been a dreadful misunderstanding, dear. We've all missed you terribly." I listened, my finger hovering over the delete button. "Eleanor is she's beside herself. She didn't mean, well, you know how she gets." A small, nervous laugh. "Why don't you come over for tea? This Saturday? We can talk. We can fix this. Family is family, after all. A dreadful misunderstanding that lasted 3 years. Family is family." I pressed block number. I had no desire to ever hear that voice again, but the story was out. Sophia had seen my house. My mother had confirmed it. And the Lake Forest Winnetka Lake Bluff gossip mill, the one my mother and aunt had presided over for decades, kicked into high gear. I didn't have to do a thing. I didn't have to say a single word. I just went back to work. About a week later, I was in a coffee shop in Winnetka, waiting for a meeting. The 2 women at the table next to me were immaculately dressed. They had the unmistakable Lake Forest look. I was on my laptop, but I could hear every whispered word. "Did you hear?" one of them said, leaning in conspiratorially. "About Eleanor Evans and her own daughter?" "I know," the other replied. "I heard she kicked her out of the house, cut her off completely, just threw her out with nothing." "And the daughter," the first one said, her voice dropping dramatically. "She's Clara Evans, the Nexus Grid woman. She's worth... Honestly, I heard hundreds of millions. She lives in that new glass house on the bluff. No. Yes. And Sophia. Well, you heard about Mark's fund, right? It imploded. A disastrous investment. They're ruined. They're trying to sell the Lake Forest house, but I heard it's in foreclosure. My God. So Eleanor gave everything to the daughter who lost it all and threw away the one who… My God, can you imagine? The first woman sipped her latte. Eleanor is a pariah. No one would even sit with her at the foundation luncheon. They say she's desperate. Can you blame them? It's not just the cruelty. It's embarrassing. She made the worst investment of her life. I just sipped my coffee, paid my bill, and left for my meeting. My mother's entire world was built on a single foundation: appearances. Her status, her circle of friends, her reputation as a shrewd, successful woman. And in one afternoon, it had all crumbled to dust. She wasn't being shunned because she was cruel. I'm sure most of them were just as cruel in their own ways. She was being shunned because she was wrong. She had made a bad investment. She had disowned the wrong daughter. She had violated the cardinal rule of her world. She had failed to recognize success. She had embarrassed herself. The news about Sophia was just as quiet and just as definitive. I saw it mentioned in the financial section of the paper. Her husband's investment fund had collapsed after a huge, leveraged bet went south. They had lost everything. A few weeks after that, I saw the divorce filing. Mark had filed for divorce from Sophia. He had married her for her status, for her family connections, for the house. When all of that vanished, so did he. Sophia, who had been meticulously groomed for success, who had been handed everything on a silver platter, was left with nothing. She was a product assembled by my mother. And when the market for that product crashed, she possessed no skills to rebuild. She had never been taught how to build. She had only been taught how to acquire. And me? I said nothing. I got calls from local reporters. Miss Evans, do you have a comment on the foreclosure of your family's home? Ms. Evans, what is your relationship with your mother, Eleanor Evans? I instructed my assistant to give the same response every time. We have no comment on Ms. Evans's personal life. She is focused on the expansion of Nexus Grid Solutions. My silence was more powerful than any screaming match could ever have been. I didn't need to fight them. I didn't need to expose them. Their world did it for me. I was busy. I was building. They had only ever known how to destroy. All those friends, all the people who had applauded at that dinner table, they just stood by and whispered as my mother and sister fell from grace. I'm standing on my rooftop terrace. It's 6 a.m. The sun is just beginning its ascent over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. It's quiet up here. The only sounds are the wind rustling through the tall grasses I planted and the faint, almost inaudible hum of my solar panels. They're already at work, converting the day's first light into energy. That energy is flowing down into my house, into my servers, and out into the grid. My house is running. My company is running. The code I wrote with my own 2 hands is working. I'm holding a warm mug of coffee, and I'm thinking about the word revenge. I suspect a lot of people who hear my story, who hear about my mother and sister, assume this was all about revenge. They think I built a multi-million-dollar company and a glass house in the next town over just to spite them. They think I did it to make them jealous, to make them hurt. They're wrong. Revenge is a sickness. It's a fire that consumes you from the inside out. It makes you just as ugly as the people who harmed you. I didn't have time for revenge. I was too busy trying to survive. I was too busy trying to prove that I was right, not that they were wrong. What happened to them? That wasn't my revenge. Those were just consequences. My mother, Eleanor, didn't build her life on family or love. She built it on status, on the opinions of other people. Her friends were her shareholders. And when I reappeared, a daughter she had banished, and proved she had made a catastrophic investment, her shareholders divested. She wasn't ruined by me. She was ruined by her own people, by her own value system. She lost her circle. My sister, Sophia, never built a life either. She was a product my mother had manufactured, groomed to have a career, to marry a man with a portfolio, to inherit a house. She was taught to acquire, not to create. When her husband's money disappeared and the house was gone, he was gone too. She lost her status. They built their lives on sand. I built mine on code, on logic, on work, on something real. I didn't win by fighting them. I didn't win by shouting or crying or demanding my rightful share. I won by walking away. I won by building a life so full and so strong that there was no room left in it for their poison. I look out at the water. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sad. I'm not the victim cowering at that dinner table. I'm simply at peace. It's not a loud, triumphant feeling. It's a quiet, steady state of being. It's the absence of their voices in my head. It's the simple, clean knowledge that I am finally, completely safe. I'm Clara Evans. I built a future my father would have been proud of, and I did it myself. It's a strange story, isn't it? My own family threw me away. They tried to erase me. If you've ever felt cast aside by family, by friends, by anyone, I want you to tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes walking away isn't about revenge. It's about freedom.